They called him Cato, a man born in chains, but with hands skilled enough to shape wood into beauty. He had only one joy left in the world, his wife, Dinah. But on a cruel morning, she was torn from his side, sold south like livestock, while her master smirked at his pain. That night, Cato's grief turned into fury. He crept into the big house, raised his axe, and split open the man who owned his life. Blood on the floor, fire in his chest. But this was no ending. It was the beginning of a hunt through swamps and shadows, with dogs, guns, and a vengeful son on his trail. Cato and Dinah weren't just running from chains anymore. They were running toward freedom, no matter the cost. This is the story of how love, rage, and desperation can make a man both hero and monster. The slave who axed his master after his wife was sold and escaped into the night toward freedom. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Dawn crept across the plantation like a thief, stealing away the night's brief comfort. Cato stood in the yard, his calloused hands moving with practiced precision as he shaped a chair leg on his workbench. Every few moments, his eyes lifted toward the slave quarters where Dinah sat in the doorway of their small cabin. Her fingers moved nimbly through fabric as she hummed a melody that carried across the morning air. The plantation sprawled around them, 500 acres of cotton fields that seemed to stretch forever under the Georgia sun. The big house stood on a gentle rise, white columns gleaming like bones against the sky. Between the fields and the house lay the world Cato knew. The workshop, where he crafted furniture for the master's family, the barn where tools were kept under lock and key, and the quarters where 28 souls tried to make lives from the scraps they were allowed. Cato tested the smoothness of the wood beneath his fingers. The master wanted 6 new dining chairs by the end of the month. It was good work, better than picking cotton under the beating sun. But Cato never forgot that his skill with wood was just another thing the master owned. Dinah's voice drifted to him again. The sound anchored him, as it had for the 5 years since they'd been allowed to marry. She was sewing a patch onto one of the master's shirts, her dark head bent over the cloth, sunlight catching the edges of her headscarf. When the bell rang for the field hands to begin their day, Cato set down his tools. He had a few minutes before the overseer would expect him back at work. He walked across the packed dirt toward Dinah, feeling the weight of eyes watching from the big house porch. "That singing will get you in trouble one day," he said softly, stopping before her. Dinah looked up, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Then I'll sing quieter, but I won't stop." She finished a stitch. "How's the chair coming?" "Good enough the master might forget I made it." Cato lowered his voice. "Did you hear about Marcus and Lily? They ran 3 nights ago." Dinah's fingers paused. "The patrollers? Still looking." Cato glanced toward the fields. "They had a map, Dinah. A real map to the north." Hope flickered across her face like a candle flame in wind. "Do you ever think?" "All the time," he whispered. "There's a station in Augusta there. A man who helps people cross the river to the north." Dinah reached for his hand, her touch light as a moth's wing. "Someday," she murmured. "Someday we might—" "Mighty cozy conversation for working hours." The overseer's voice cut between them like a whip. Cato straightened, his face sliding into the blank mask he wore around white folks. The overseer, Mr. Jenkins, stood watching them, thumbs hooked in his belt near the coiled whip he carried. "Just checking my wife's mending, sir," Cato said, eyes lowered. Jenkins snorted. "Ain't that sweet?" He turned to Dinah. "You finish them shirts by sundown, or there'll be trouble." His gaze shifted to Cato. "And you, for a man who works with his hands, you sure do like to run your mouth." "Yes, sir." "Sorry, sir." Jenkins stepped closer, forcing Cato to back away from his own wife. "Master says you're clever with wood. Might even be the best craftsman in the county." His smile showed yellowed teeth. But don't you forget, that skill belongs to the master, same as the rest of you. I know my place, Mr. Jenkins. See that you keep it. Jenkins glanced at Dinah, his eyes lingering too long. Both of you. After the overseer walked away, Cato stood motionless, something cold and hard building in his chest. He could craft a chair that would sell for more than he would bring at auction, yet he couldn't protect Dinah from a man's stare. Don't, Dinah whispered, reading his thoughts. It's not worth it. Cato nodded once. I should get back to work. The day passed in measured hours. Cato shaped wood while sweat darkened his shirt. From time to time he caught glimpses of Dinah as she carried laundry or hurried on errands to the big house. Each sight of her steadied him. When darkness finally came, they returned to their cabin. One small room with a dirt floor and walls made of rough-hewn boards Cato had fitted together 3 summers ago. A straw mattress lay in one corner. A 3-legged stool stood near the hearth, where a small fire fought against the evening chill. Dinah spooned corn mush into 2 wooden bowls. They ate in silence, the day's exhaustion settling over them. Outside, voices murmured as others returned to their cabins. Someone strummed a banjo quietly, cutting off abruptly when a door slammed at the big house. Marcus and Lily had a child in Virginia, Dinah said suddenly. Did you know? A little girl? Sold away 2 years ago? Cato set down his empty bowl. No, I didn't. They're not just running to something. They're running to someone. Dinah's eyes held his in the firelight. That's worth any risk. Cato reached across the small space between them, taking her hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, warm and solid and real. For a moment, they sat in silence, the plantation falling away until there was only this, their 2 hands joined in the firelight. We'll endure, he promised. Whatever comes, we face it together. Dinah squeezed his hand. Together, she echoed, her voice soft but certain. They finished their meal in silence, unaware that by morning, the world they knew, harsh as it was, would shatter completely, leaving them with choices no human should have to make. Morning came too quickly. Cato woke to shouts outside the cabin, harsh voices cutting through the thin walls. Beside him, Dinah stirred, her eyes opening with the wariness that never quite left them. What's happening? She whispered. Cato rose, pulling on his shirt. Stay here, he said, though they both knew she had no choice in the matter. He stepped outside into the gray dawn light. The shouting grew louder, coming from the center of the quarters where the other cabins clustered around the packed dirt yard. A wagon stood there, not the plantation wagon used for hauling crops, but a different one with iron bars forming a cage on its bed. A trader's wagon. Cato's heart stumbled in his chest. Traders' wagons meant only one thing. Someone was being sold. Other slaves gathered at their doorways, faces tight with the same fear. Nobody moved forward. Nobody spoke. They all knew better. The master stood beside the wagon in his riding clothes, looking impatient. The overseer, Jenkins, walked between the cabins, peering inside each one. When he reached Cato and Dinah's cabin, he smiled. There she is, he called over his shoulder. Found her, Master Harrison. Before Cato could move, Jenkins pushed past him into the cabin. There was a scream, Dinah's voice, and then Jenkins dragged her outside by the arm. Her nightdress caught on the rough door frame, tearing at the shoulder. No, Cato whispered, the word falling useless from his lips. Master Harrison nodded toward the trader, a tall man with a red beard who stood smoking a pipe beside his wagon. This is the one, Harrison said. Good with a needle, healthy, no trouble. The trader stepped forward, grabbing Dinah's chin and turning her face from side to side. She kept her eyes down, but Cato could see how she trembled. Teeth? The trader asked. Harrison nodded, and Jenkins forced Dinah's mouth open with rough fingers. All there, the trader noted. Good. Age? 24 or thereabouts, Harrison replied. Papers are in order. Cato stumbled forward. Master Harrison, he said, the words catching in his throat. "Please, sir, she's my wife." Harrison turned, noticing Cato for the first time. "Ah, the carpenter. Well, you'll find another woman. Jenkins has had his eye on that new girl from the Wilkins place." "Please," Cato said again, moving closer. "I'll work harder. I'll make twice the furniture. Anything you want." The trader laughed. "Sounds like he's sweet on her." "Sir," Cato continued, his voice cracking, "I'm begging you." Jenkins stepped between them. "That's enough out of you. Get back to work." But Cato couldn't stop. The thought of Dinah being taken away, sold south where slaves were worked harder, where he would never see her again. It broke something inside him. He fell to his knees before the master. "I'll do anything," he pleaded. "Don't sell her, please. Take me instead." Harrison's face darkened. "You forget yourself, boy." Jenkins's hand went to his whip. "I told you to shut your mouth." From the corner of his eye, Cato saw Dinah being pulled toward the wagon. Her eyes found his, wide with terror. "Cato!" she screamed. The first lash caught Cato across the back, tearing through his shirt. He gasped, but didn't move. "Master, please listen." The second blow knocked him forward onto his hands. The third came before he could catch his breath. Behind him, he heard Dinah screaming his name again, her voice breaking. 20 lashes, Harrison ordered. "Teach him his place." The whip rose and fell. Pain bloomed across Cato's back like fire. Through tears, he saw Dinah being forced up into the wagon. The trader clasped iron shackles around her wrists and ankles. "Cato!" she cried, reaching toward him through the bars. "Cato!" The wagon lurched forward. Dinah's face pressed against the iron bars, her tears catching the morning light. The whip continued to fall, but Cato barely felt it now. Something worse than pain filled him as he watched the wagon begin to roll away. "Dinah," he whispered, the word lost beneath the crack of the whip. Jenkins didn't stop at 20. The lashes continued until Cato collapsed face down in the dirt, unable to move. Blood soaked through what remained of his shirt, running in warm rivulets down his sides. "Let that be a lesson," Harrison announced to the silent slaves watching from their doorways. "This one thought himself special because he can shape wood, but he's no different than the rest of you." Footsteps moved away. The master and overseer returned to the big house, leaving Cato bleeding in the dirt. No one came to help him. They couldn't risk it. Not yet. The trader's wagon grew smaller in the distance, taking Dinah farther away with each turn of its wheels. Cato's tears mixed with the dirt beneath his face. But even as he wept, something else grew inside him, a cold, hard feeling that had no name. For 10 years he had bent his head. For 10 years he had worked without complaint, building beautiful things for people who saw him as less than human. He had believed that if he did as he was told, if he was valuable enough, they might leave him this one small happiness, his life with Dinah. Now she was gone. When he could finally move again, Cato dragged himself to his knees. Blood dripped from his back to the ground. He stared at the road where the wagon had disappeared, his tears drying on his cheeks. In their place came something else, a cold determination that settled in his bones like iron. The hands that had shaped wood so carefully now curled into fists at his sides. Night would come, as it always did. The master would sleep in his fine house, on a bed Cato had built. Jenkins would drink himself stupid in his cabin by the barn. And when darkness covered the plantation, when the only sounds were crickets and the distant howl of a hunting dog, Cato would make them understand what they had taken from him. He would make them pay. Night descended like a shroud over the plantation. The slave quarters had gone quiet hours ago, the only sounds coming from the occasional cough or creak of wooden bunks. Most had collapsed into exhausted sleep after another day of backbreaking labor. But not Cato. He sat motionless on the edge of his pallet, staring at the empty space beside him where Dinah should have been. The cabin felt hollow without her gentle breathing. without the soft weight of her body next to his. Old Ma Rachel had cleaned his wounds and spread a poultice of herbs across his torn back, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emptiness tearing at his chest. Through the small window, he could see the big house glowing with lamplight. Master Harrison would be finishing his evening meal about now, perhaps drinking his brandy in the study. The house Cato had helped build, the furniture he had crafted with his own hands, all of it stood as a monument to the man who had stolen Dinah from him. Beside the door leaned the axe Cato had used that morning to split firewood. Its blade caught the faint moonlight coming through the window, a dull gleam in the darkness. His eyes kept returning to it as the night deepened. When the last lamp in the big house finally went out, Cato rose. His back screamed in protest as scabs broke open, but he ignored the pain. He pulled on a clean shirt. Dinah had mended it just yesterday, and reached for the axe. The wooden handle felt smooth and familiar in his palm. How many times had he swung it to split oak and pine? Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. He stepped outside. The quarter was silent, a collection of shadows under the quarter moon. Dogs should have barked at his movement, but Jenkins had taken them hunting earlier. Another small mercy. Cato moved like a ghost between the cabins, keeping to the deepest shadows. The night air felt cool against his skin as he crossed the open ground between the quarters and the big house. Every sense was alert. The smell of jasmine from the garden, the distant hoot of an owl, the feel of damp grass beneath his bare feet. The back door to the kitchen was never locked. No slave would dare enter uninvited. But Cato was beyond such fears now. He eased it open, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. The kitchen was dark, but familiar. He had built the long table where the house slaves prepared meals. Moving through the darkness, he found his way to the main hallway. The stairs to the second floor rose before him. Cato had climbed them countless times, carrying furniture or firewood, always with his eyes lowered, always careful to make himself invisible. Now he ascended with his gaze fixed upward, the axe gripped tightly in his right hand. At the top of the stairs, he paused. The master's bedroom was at the end of the hall, the largest room with windows facing east. The door would be closed, but not locked. Harrison feared nothing inside his own house. Cato's heart hammered against his ribs as he crept down the hall. The thick carpet muffled his footsteps. A clock ticked somewhere, counting down seconds of a life about to end. He reached the door and placed his hand on the brass knob, turning it slowly. The door swung inward without a sound. Cato himself had oiled those hinges last month. Inside, the large four-poster bed loomed in the darkness. Harrison lay sprawled across it, mouth open in sleep. The smell of brandy filled the room, sweet and sickening. Cato stood over him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. This man who had ordered Dinah sold without a second thought. This man who had watched Cato bleed in the dirt and walked away. This man who owned them both like they were no more than the furniture in his house. Harrison stirred slightly, mumbling something in his drunken sleep. A flicker of fear passed through Cato. What if he woke? What if he called out? But the moment passed, and the master settled back into his dreams, unaware of death standing over him. Cato raised the axe. In that moment, all the years of bowed head and lowered eyes, all the yes, master, and no, master, all the pain and humiliation and fear, it all channeled down his arms into the wooden handle of the axe. The blade came down with all his strength. There was a dull, wet sound as metal met flesh and bone. Harrison's eyes flew open in shock, a strangled noise catching in his throat. But there was no scream, no call for help. The axe had split his skull like a piece of kindling. Blood sprayed across the white sheets. Harrison's body jerked once, twice, then went still. His eyes remained open, staring at Cato with eternal surprise. Cato stood frozen, his hands still gripping the axe handle. The only sound in the room was his own labored breathing. He had expected to feel something, triumph, perhaps, or satisfaction. Instead, there was only a hollow feeling, like the echo in an empty well. He pulled the axe free with a sickening sound. Blood pooled on the bed, soaking into the mattress Cato had stuffed with cotton last summer. Some distant part of him noted the irony, his handiwork witnessing his vengeance. But there was no time to linger. By dawn, the house slaves would discover the body. By noon, every slave catcher in the county would be hunting him. If he was to find Dinah, he needed to move quickly. Cato backed away from the bed, still clutching the axe. Blood dripped from its blade onto the carpet. He moved through the doorway and down the hall, his mind suddenly clear and focused. The trader's wagon couldn't have gone far, not with night coming on. They would have stopped at one of the way stations along the southern road, maybe at Benson's Creek, where the old mill stood. He descended the stairs swiftly, no longer caring about the sound of his footsteps. In the kitchen, he grabbed a small sack and filled it with cornbread and dried meat. Water would be plentiful enough along the creek paths. The night air felt different when he stepped outside again, sharper somehow, as if his senses had been dulled before. Behind him, the big house stood silent, blood pooling in its master's bedroom. Ahead lay wilderness, danger, and somewhere in the darkness, Dinah. Cato looked once more at the axe in his hand. The blade gleamed wet in the moonlight. He could have dropped it, left it behind as evidence of his crime, but instead, he gripped it tighter. The world he was stepping into was one where such a weapon might mean survival. Without a backward glance, he moved toward the tree line, his figure melting into the shadows. By dawn, he would be miles away, following the southern road, hunting the wagon that carried his heart away in chains. The moon hung high and bright, casting silver light through the tree branches. Cato moved swiftly through the woods that bordered the plantation road, his bare feet finding the path with practiced ease. The axe in his right hand was still sticky with blood, but he hadn't stopped to clean it. There would be time for that later, or perhaps not at all if he failed. He kept to the tree line, staying hidden while following the deep wagon ruts that scarred the dirt road. The trader's heavy wagon had left clear tracks, 2 parallel grooves pressed deep into the soft earth, flanked by hoofprints from the team of mules. Cato's eyes, sharp from years of measuring wood in poor light, could read these marks even in the darkness. "Hold on, Dinah," he whispered to the night. "I'm coming." The southern road wound through thick pines before dipping toward Benson's Creek. Traders usually stopped there to water their animals before pushing on to the larger town of Millerton. If luck was with him, and when had it ever been, the wagon might have stopped for the night near the creek crossing. Cato paused to drink from a small stream, cupping the cool water in his palm. His back still burned where the overseer's whip had cut deep, and the dried blood on his shirt pulled at the wounds with every movement. He ignored the pain. Pain had been his companion for as long as he could remember. It was the absence of Dinah that he couldn't bear. The moon slid behind a cloud, and the forest darkened. Cato continued forward, one hand extended to feel his way through the blackness. When the moon emerged again, he spotted something ahead on the road, a piece of cloth caught on a bramble. Drawing closer, his heart quickened. It was a scrap of blue cotton, the same fabric as Dinah's dress. She had been this way, and not long ago. The cloth wasn't damp with dew yet. Cato quickened his pace. The road curved ahead, following the natural contour of the land as it sloped toward the creek bottom. The smell of stagnant water reached him, and he knew he was approaching the swampy lowlands that surrounded Benson's Creek. As the road descended, the going became tougher. The ground grew soft and muddy, each step making a soft sucking sound. Cato moved even more carefully now, scanning ahead for any sign of the wagon. The first pink light of dawn was just beginning to touch the eastern sky when he heard it. A man's voice cursing, followed by the crack of a whip and the grunt of a mule. Cato dropped low, sliding behind a fallen log at the edge of the road. 50 yards ahead, the trader's wagon stood half sunk in deep mud. One of the mules had collapsed in its harness, lying on its side and breathing heavily. The other mule strained against the weight, but the wagon remained stuck fast. The trader, a burly man in a stained coat, was cursing as he whipped the standing mule uselessly, and there, chained to the back of the wagon, sat Dinah. Even from this distance, Cato could see her slumped shoulders, her head bowed. Iron shackles glinted on her wrists and ankles. The sight sent a wave of rage through him, so powerful it nearly drove him to his feet. But Cato forced himself to remain still, to think. The trader was armed. He could see a pistol tucked into his belt. Rushing in blindly would only get them both killed. Instead, Cato circled wide through the swamp, moving silently through reeds and shallow water. The mud sucked at his feet, but he kept his movements slow and deliberate, making barely a ripple. Years of moving quietly under the overseer's watchful eye had taught him how to become nearly invisible. He worked his way around until he was behind the wagon, approaching from the opposite side of the road. The trader was now at the front, unhitching the dead mule, his back to Dinah. Cato crept closer. When he was just yards away, sheltered by a stand of cypress, he let out a soft, two-noted whistle, the same sound he used to call to Dinah across the cotton fields. Her head snapped up, eyes searching the dim light. When she saw him emerging from the swamp, axe in hand, her eyes widened with shock. She opened her mouth, but Cato quickly pressed a finger to his lips. The trader was cursing steadily now, fighting with the leather harness. "Worthless animal," he spat, kicking the dead mule. "Cost me a day's travel at least." Cato moved forward, each step carefully placed to avoid making sound. The mud helped, cushioning his footfall. He was just feet away when a twig snapped under his heel. The trader whirled, his hand reaching for his pistol. But Cato was already moving, lunging forward with the axe raised high. The trader managed to pull his weapon, but before he could aim, the axe came down. The blade caught him where neck met shoulder, biting deep. Blood sprayed across the wagon's wooden side. The trader made a gurgling sound, his pistol dropping unfired from nerveless fingers. He stumbled backward, clutching at the wound, eyes wide with disbelief. Cato swung again, and this time the trader fell and did not rise. "Cato!" Dinah's voice was a desperate whisper. "Oh, Lord, Cato!" He rushed to her, examining the chains that bound her to the wagon. They were secured with a heavy padlock. Cato searched the trader's pockets, finding a ring of keys. His hands shook as he tried each one until the lock finally clicked open. The moment she was free, Dinah threw herself into his arms. They clung to each other fiercely, her body trembling against his. "I thought," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I thought I'd never see you again. I would have followed you to the ends of the earth," Cato said, his face buried in her hair. He breathed in her scent, feeling whole again for the first time since she'd been taken. But there was no time for reunion. Cato pulled back, his hands gripping her shoulders. "We have to go. The master—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding dawned in Dinah's eyes. "What did you do, Cato?" "What I had to," he replied. "They'll be coming with dogs before the day is out." In the distance, as if summoned by his words, came the faint sound of barking, still far off, but clear in the dawn stillness. "This way," Cato said, taking Dinah's hand and leading her toward the swamp. "The water will hide our scent." They moved quickly now, splashing into the murky water. Cypress knees rose around them like grasping fingers as they waded deeper. Behind them lay the road, the stuck wagon, and the trader's body growing cold in the mud. Ahead lay wilderness and uncertainty, but they faced it together, hands clasped tightly. The barking grew louder. The hunt had begun. The morning sun pierced through the cypress trees in thin golden shafts, illuminating the mist that hung over the swamp. Cato and Dinah pushed forward through the thick reeds, their clothes soaked and heavy. The swamp water reached to their knees in most places, sometimes rising to their waists in unexpected drops. Every step was a struggle against mud that tried to claim their feet. "Keep moving," Cato whispered, his voice barely audible above the chorus of frogs and insects awakening with the dawn. He gripped Dinah's hand tightly, steadying her when she stumbled on hidden roots beneath the murky water. Dinah's face was drawn with exhaustion. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, and her lips were cracked from thirst. Still, she nodded and pressed on. Neither of them had slept. Neither had eaten. But hunger and fatigue were lesser fears than what pursued them. "Can we drink this water?" Dinah asked, looking at the brownish swamp water surrounding them. Cato shook his head. "Not unless we want to get sick. There's bound to be a clean stream somewhere. We just need to keep going." They moved forward in silence for a time, the only sounds their labored breathing and the splash of water as they waded through the swamp. Mosquitoes swarmed around them, drawn to their sweat and blood. Dinah swatted at them weakly, too tired to even complain. Cato stopped suddenly, raising his hand for silence. Dinah froze beside him. "Listen," he whispered. In the distance, carried on the morning breeze, came the sound of dogs barking, not the casual yapping of hunting hounds on a normal day's chase, but the frenzied howling of animals who had caught a scent. Human voices followed, calling to each other across the woods. "They're coming," Dinah said, her voice trembling. "How did they find us so quickly?" Cato's jaw tightened. The creek water wasn't enough to hide our trail. He looked around desperately, then pointed to their right. "This way. The water's deeper over there. It'll slow the dogs down." They changed direction, pushing toward a darker stretch of swamp, where cypress trees grew so thick their branches formed a canopy overhead. The water deepened as Cato had predicted, rising to their chests. Dinah struggled to keep her head above water, standing on her tiptoes. "I've got you," Cato assured her, supporting her with one arm. The axe in his other hand felt heavier with each passing minute, but he refused to let it go. It was their only weapon, their only defense against what followed. They emerged on the other side of the deep patch into slightly shallower water. Ahead, a fallen tree created a natural bridge across part of the swamp. Cato helped Dinah climb onto it, and they moved across, grateful to be out of the water even briefly. From this higher vantage point, Cato surveyed their back trail. What he saw made his blood run cold. About half a mile back, where they had first entered the swamp, movement flickered between the trees. Men on horseback were spreading out along the edge of the water. Even at this distance, Cato could make out the shapes of rifles in their hands, and the dogs straining at their leashes. "It's the young master," Cato said grimly, recognizing a slight figure on a chestnut horse. "Master William. He must have seen me that night." Dinah's hand tightened around his. "What do we do now?" Before Cato could answer, a branch snapped loudly nearby. They both dropped flat on the log, hearts pounding. Not 30 yards away, a rider pushed through the underbrush. The man was peering intently at the ground, following some sign only he could see. His dog ran ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging excitedly. "They went this way," the man called back over his shoulder. "The water ain't stopped these dogs none." Cato and Dinah lay frozen on the log, hardly daring to breathe. The man was so close that Cato could see the sweat stains on his shirt, could hear the creak of his saddle as he shifted his weight. "Come on through," the tracker shouted. "I got sign." More branches broke as other riders approached. Cato glanced desperately around, then spotted a hollow beneath the root system of a massive cypress tree just beyond the end of their log. He nudged Dinah and pointed. She understood immediately. When the tracker turned his head to call again to his companions, Cato and Dinah slid silently off the log and into the water. Moving as quietly as possible, they made their way to the hollow and squeezed inside. The space was barely big enough for both of them, forcing them to press tightly together. Tangled roots formed a screen in front of them, hiding them from view while allowing them to see out. Through these roots, they watched as 5 riders gathered where they had been moments before. The dogs circled the fallen log, whining in confusion as the scent trail seemed to vanish. "They was here," the tracker insisted, dismounting to examine the log more closely. "See there? Wet marks where they climbed up." A younger man rode forward on a chestnut horse. Even covered in mud and sweat, his clothes were finer than those of the others. Master William, barely 16, but already carrying himself with the arrogance of a slave owner. "Find them," he ordered, his voice cracking with the effort to sound authoritative. "My father's blood demands justice. $10 to the man who brings me the killer's head." The men spread out, beating the bushes and prodding at the water with sticks. One passed so close to their hiding place that Cato could have reached out and touched his boot. Dinah trembled against him, and he held her tighter, praying the man wouldn't look down. After what seemed like an eternity, the tracker called out from farther along the swamp's edge. "Got sign again! They doubled back this way." The riders gathered their dogs and moved off, following the false trail. Cato and Dinah remained hidden, afraid to move too soon. Only when the sounds of the hunting party had faded did Cato dare to whisper. "We'll wait until dark," he said. "Then head north. There's people who help runaways, if we can find them." Dinah nodded, too exhausted to speak. She rested her head against his shoulder, and within moments her breathing had deepened into sleep. Cato remained alert, watching through the screen of roots. As the day wore on, he occasionally caught glimpses of the hunters moving through the swamp. Sometimes they were frustratingly close. Other times they were just distant shapes flickering between trees. But they never stopped searching. As dusk approached, Cato saw torches being lit in the distance. The dancing flames reflected off the still waters of the swamp, creating an eerie, shifting landscape of light and shadow. The hunters would not stop when darkness fell. They would continue through the night. The chase was only beginning. The morning light grew stronger, turning the misty swamp into a humid oven. Cato and Dinah had left their hiding place once the hunters moved far enough away, pushing deeper into the unfamiliar terrain. Their stomachs had long since stopped growling, and now just ached with emptiness. Their throats burned with thirst. "We need water," Cato said, his voice scratchy. "Clean water." Dinah nodded weakly. Her dress hung in tatters, torn by branches and briars. The skin on her arms was covered in angry red welts from mosquito bites and scratches. Still, she kept moving, one foot in front of the other. "Listen," she whispered suddenly, grabbing Cato's arm. He froze, straining his ears. At first, he heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the swamp. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, birds calling. Then he caught it. Human voices, very faint, speaking in hushed tones. "This way," Cato whispered, pulling Dinah toward the sound. They moved cautiously, stopping often to listen. The voices grew clearer. Not the rough shouts of the hunting party, but quieter, more careful speech. Finally, they pushed through a thick wall of reeds and found themselves at the edge of a small clearing. In the center, a crude lean-to of branches and moss sheltered 3 figures. The strangers spotted them immediately. A tall, thin man leaped to his feet, clutching a sharpened stick. Beside him, a woman pulled a young boy behind her protectively. "We mean no harm," Cato called softly, raising his empty hand. He kept the axe low by his side, not wanting to appear threatening. The man lowered his stick slightly, but remained wary. "Who are you? Where'd you come from?" "We're running," Dinah answered simply. "Like you." The woman stepped forward, studying them. Her face was gaunt with hunger, but her eyes were alert and intelligent. "You the ones they hunting?" "We heard the dogs all night." Cato nodded. "I killed my master. They sold my wife south. I couldn't let her go. The admission hung in the air. The fugitives exchanged glances, then the man nodded and lowered his stick completely. "I'm Moses," he said. "This here's Ruth and her boy, Samuel." Cato introduced himself and Dinah. "You got any water?" Ruth picked up a hollowed gourd and offered it to them. "Found a clean spring back yonder. Not much food, though." Dinah drank gratefully, then passed the gourd to Cato. The water was warm but clean, washing away the taste of mud and fear from his mouth. "How long you been out here?" Cato asked, handing the empty gourd back. 8 days, Moses answered. "Heading north. Heard tell of people who help. The Underground Railroad," Ruth added in a whisper, as if saying the name too loudly might make it disappear. "White folks who hide runaways and send them on to free states." Dinah's eyes widened. "You know where to find them?" Moses nodded cautiously. "Got directions from an old man 3 plantations over. Said to follow the North Star till we reach a river. Cross at the Narrows, where 3 big rocks stick up. Then look for a farm with a red barn. They'll have a quilt hanging outside if it's safe." Hope flickered in Dinah's eyes. The first Cato had seen since their escape. It made his heart ache to see it, knowing how easily hope could be crushed in this world. "How far?" he asked. 2, maybe 3 days if we keep moving," Moses replied. "But we're splitting up today. Safer that way." Too many together draws attention. Ruth handed them a small bundle wrapped in leaves, berries, and some roots. "Not much, but it'll keep you going." "Thank you," Dinah said, clutching the precious food. Samuel, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "They got dogs again. Coming this way." Everyone fell silent, listening. In the distance, the baying of hounds carried through the still morning air. "They circling back," Moses said grimly. "Time to move." They quickly gathered their few possessions. Before parting, Moses pointed to the north. "Keep the morning sun on your right. You'll hit the river by tomorrow if you don't stop. Remember, 3 rocks at the Narrows." Ruth embraced Dinah briefly. "God be with you, sister." "And with you," Dinah whispered back. Then they were separating, Moses and his group heading northeast, while Cato and Dinah continued northwest. The shared moment of community made the return to their isolated flight all the more painful. As they walked, Dinah spoke of the safe house with growing animation. "Just think, Cato, people waiting to help us, a place to rest without fear, maybe even a real bed." Cato didn't answer immediately. He wanted to believe in this safe house, this underground railroad, but his life had taught him that safety was an illusion, especially for people like them. "We'll find it," he said finally, not wanting to dampen her newfound hope. "But we got to be careful. Even if these people do help runaways, they might not help us. Not with what I'd done." Dinah squeezed his hand. "You did what you had to. For me." They walked in silence after that, stopping only to eat a few of the berries Ruth had given them. The food barely took the edge off their hunger, but it gave them enough strength to keep moving. The day dragged on, the sun beating down through the trees. They found another spring and drank deeply, filling the empty gourd Moses had given them. By late afternoon, the ground began to rise slightly, and the swamp gradually gave way to more solid forest. As dusk approached, they heard the sound of rushing water ahead. Following the noise, they emerged from the trees to find themselves on the bank of a wide river. The current looked strong, the water dark and forbidding. "We need to cross," Cato said, studying the river. "Put more distance between us and them dogs." Dinah nodded, though fear showed in her eyes. "I don't swim so good." Cato scanned the riverbank until he spotted what he needed. Several fallen trees partially submerged near the edge. "We don't need to swim. See those logs? We can hold on to them. Let the current carry us across." As night fell, they waded cautiously into the chilly water. Cato went first, testing the logs to find one sturdy enough to support them. Once he found a good one, he helped Dinah grip it tightly. "Just hold on," he instructed. "Keep your head up. Let your legs float behind you." The current caught them immediately, pulling them away from the bank. The water was colder than Cato expected, shocking the breath from his lungs. Beside him, Dinah gasped but maintained her grip on the log. Together they floated, the current carrying them downstream as they gradually worked their way across. By the time they reached the opposite bank, they were several hundred yards downstream from where they'd started. They crawled out of the water, shivering and exhausted, and collapsed on the muddy shore. The night was clear, stars spreading across the sky above them. Somewhere in that vastness was the North Star, guiding them toward an uncertain freedom. "We made it across," Dinah whispered, her teeth chattering. Cato pulled her close, trying to share what little warmth he had. "We'll rest here tonight. Push on at dawn." The first light of dawn filtered through the trees as Cato and Dinah stumbled forward. Their clothes were still damp from the river crossing, and hunger gnawed at their bellies. They had followed the North Star through the night, stopping only for brief rests when exhaustion threatened to drop them where they stood. "Look," Dinah whispered, pointing ahead. Through the trees, they could make out the shape of a small farmhouse. Smoke curled from its chimney, disappearing into the pale morning sky. A red barn stood nearby, and hanging from its side, just as Moses had described, was a patchwork quilt, its colors bright against the weathered wood. "The safe house," Cato said, his voice a mix of hope and suspicion. "But we need to be careful. Could be a trap." They crouched at the edge of the woods, watching the farmhouse for any sign of danger. After several minutes, the back door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was thin and gray-haired, dressed in a simple brown dress. She scattered feed for a small flock of chickens, then paused, looking directly toward the trees where they hid. "I know you're there," she called, her voice neither threatening nor afraid. "The quilt means you're welcome here. Come on out before someone else spots you." Cato and Dinah exchanged glances. Years of caution warred with desperate need. "Stay here," Cato whispered to Dinah. "I'll go first. If anything happens, run." Clutching his axe, Cato stepped from the trees. The woman didn't flinch at the sight of his weapon or his ragged appearance. "My name is Margaret," she said simply. "This is a safe house. Are you alone?" "My wife," Cato answered, gesturing behind him. "We've been running for days." Margaret nodded. "Bring her." "Quickly now." Cato motioned to Dinah, who emerged hesitantly from the trees. Together, they approached the farmhouse, every step taking them further from the relative safety of the forest. Margaret held the door open for them. "Inside," she urged. "The patrols come by sometimes, looking for runaways." The farmhouse kitchen was warm and smelled of fresh bread. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the scent of beans and salt pork. Cato and Dinah stood awkwardly just inside the door, dripping water onto the clean wooden floor. "Sit," Margaret said, pointing to the table. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Dinah answered. "Some berries." Margaret clicked her tongue disapprovingly and ladled 2 bowls of the steaming stew. She set them on the table along with thick slices of bread. "Eat. Then we'll get you dry clothes." They didn't need to be told twice. Cato and Dinah fell upon the food like starving animals, scooping the rich stew into their mouths. The bread was still warm, and Dinah closed her eyes as she chewed, savoring the simple luxury. As they ate, a door creaked open. A lanky boy of about 16 appeared in the doorway, his eyes widening at the sight of the strangers. "Ma?" he questioned, his voice cracking. "It's all right, Jacob," Margaret said. "These people need our help." Jacob looked at Cato's axe, which rested against the table leg, then at the stranger's bedraggled appearance. His face showed clear discomfort, but he nodded stiffly. "I'll keep watch from the barn," he muttered, grabbing a piece of bread before slipping out the back door. "Don't mind him," Margaret said. "He's just nervous. His father was killed 2 years ago for helping folks like you." The night riders came, accused him of being an abolitionist. Her voice held old pain, but her eyes remained clear. They were right, of course. We both believed slavery was an abomination before God. Dinah reached across the table and touched Margaret's hand. "Thank you for helping us despite the danger." Margaret smiled sadly. "What else could I do? Turn away when people need help. That's not the way I was raised, nor how I raised my boy." After they finished eating, Margaret showed them to a small room off the kitchen. "You can wash up here. I'll find you some clean clothes. Jacob's father was about your size," she told Cato. "And I have some things that might fit you," she added to Dinah. Left alone, Cato and Dinah washed away days of swamp mud and fear with water from a basin. The simple act of cleaning felt like shedding a skin, leaving behind some of the terror that had driven them. When Margaret returned with clothes, Dinah almost wept at the sight of a clean dress. She changed quickly, running her fingers over the soft fabric with wonder. "Rest now," Margaret told them when they emerged. "Tonight, we'll talk about getting you further north. The next safe house is 2 days' travel, but you need strength for the journey." For the first time in days, they lay down on something other than damp ground. The small bed in the spare room felt impossibly soft after their ordeal. Cato kept his axe close, unable to fully let go of his vigilance, but even he felt the tension in his muscles begin to ease. "Cato," Dinah whispered, her head resting on his shoulder, "do you think we'll make it?" "All the way north?" "Yes," he said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. "We've come this far." "I've been thinking," she continued, her voice dreamy with exhaustion and newfound hope. "When we get there, to the free states, we could have children. Real free children, who never know what it's like to be owned." Cato felt something unlock in his chest. The image of children, their children, growing up without masters or whips or auction blocks, almost brought tears to his eyes. "Little boys who can learn to read without hiding," Dinah went on. "Girls who can look at the sky without fear." "They'll have your eyes," Cato said, allowing himself to smile. "And they'll be so free they won't even know what chains feel like." Through the window, they could see Margaret hanging more washing on the line, her movements unhurried. In the barn doorway, Jacob stood watching his mother, his thin frame tense. Every few moments, his eyes darted to the road, then back to the house where they rested. "He's scared," Dinah observed. "He has reason to be," Cato replied. "We bring danger to their door." As the afternoon faded toward evening, exhaustion finally overcame caution. They drifted into the deepest sleep they'd had since their escape, bodies curled toward each other in the narrow bed. Outside their window, night fell across the farm. In the growing darkness, Jacob's shadow separated from the barn and moved silently across the yard. His lanky figure paused once, looking back at the house with conflict clear in every line of his body. Then, decision made, he slipped away into the night, his shadow stretching long across the yard before disappearing into the darkness beyond. Cato woke with a jolt. The sound that pulled him from sleep was unmistakable, the eager barking of hunting dogs. For a heartbeat, he thought he was dreaming, but the dogs' howls grew louder, closer. "Dinah," he whispered urgently, shaking her shoulder. "Wake up!" She blinked awake, confusion clouding her face until she heard the barking. Fear washed away the last traces of sleep from her eyes. "How did they find us?" she gasped, scrambling to her feet. Cato grabbed his axe and moved to the window. Through the thin curtains, he saw them. At least 6 men on horseback approaching the farmhouse, 3 dogs straining at their leashes. At their head rode a familiar figure, the master's son, his young face twisted with hatred. "The boy," Cato said, his voice hollow with realization. "Jacob betrayed us." The door to their room burst open. Margaret stood there, her face pale with panic. "They're coming," she said unnecessarily. "Jacob, my son, he left last night. I thought he went to check the other farms, but he—" Her voice broke. He must have told them. I'm so sorry. Is there another way out? Cato demanded, already searching for an escape. Margaret nodded frantically. The cellar has a tunnel. The house was built by Quakers. Come quickly. They followed her through the kitchen to a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug. The men outside were shouting now, pounding on the front door. The dog's barking became frenzied. Down there, Margaret said, lifting the trapdoor. Follow it to the end. It comes out in the woods near the creek. Cato helped Dinah onto the ladder. Just as she descended, the front door splintered open. Heavy boots stomped into the house. Where are they, woman? A rough voice demanded. I don't know what you're talking about, Margaret answered, her voice remarkably steady despite her trembling hands. Cato hesitated at the top of the ladder. Come with us, he urged Margaret. She shook her head. I'll slow them down. Go. The slave hunters burst into the kitchen before Cato could argue further. He ducked down the ladder, pulling the trapdoor shut above him. The cellar was dark and smelled of earth and roots. Dinah clutched his arm, trembling. This way, he whispered, feeling along the wall until he found an opening, the mouth of a narrow tunnel barely tall enough to crouch in. Above them, Margaret's voice rang out, defiant. This is my house. You have no right. Her words ended in a cry of pain. Dinah's fingers dug into Cato's arm. We can't just leave her, she whispered. We have to, Cato replied grimly, or her sacrifice means nothing. They crept through the tunnel, bent almost double. The earthen walls pressed close, and the air grew thick and stale. Cato counted his steps, trying to judge how far they'd come. Then, behind them, the scrabbling of paws. The hunters had found the trap door. Run! Cato pushed Dinah ahead of him. Don't stop! They abandoned caution, scrambling through the tunnel as fast as they could. Behind them, the excited yelps of the dogs echoed off the walls, growing louder. Light appeared ahead. The tunnel's exit. Dinah reached it first, clawing her way out into the morning air. Cato followed, spinning around to face the tunnel entrance, axe raised. The first dog that emerged met the blade's edge. Its yelp cut short, but the others were already pouring out. Cato swung again, keeping them at bay. Cato! Dinah screamed. He turned to see more hunters emerging from the trees. They had anticipated the tunnel's exit. A burly man grabbed Dinah, wrestling her to the ground despite her fierce struggles. No! Cato roared, charging toward them. Something heavy struck him from behind, a rifle butt to his shoulder. He stumbled but kept his footing, whirling to strike his attacker. The axe bit deep. The man dropped with a gurgling cry. More hunters converged. Cato fought like a man possessed, the axe rising and falling. Blood sprayed across his face, but for every man he struck, another appeared. Through the chaos, he heard Dinah screaming his name. He caught glimpses of her being dragged away, fighting with every step. A shot rang out. Pain exploded in Cato's side. He staggered, feeling hot wetness spreading across his shirt. Still, he swung the axe, keeping the hunters at bay. Let her go, he roared. From the direction of the farmhouse, more shouts erupted. Cato saw Margaret being dragged out by her hair. Jacob stood nearby, his face a mask of conflicted misery. You did this? Margaret cried, seeing her son with the hunters. Your own father died for what was right, and you betray everything he stood for? They would have killed us too, Ma, Jacob protested, his voice breaking. I had to. You had a choice. Margaret's words ended in a cry as one of the men struck her. Cato saw his chance. As the hunters turned toward the commotion, he broke away, stumbling toward the trees. A bullet whizzed past his ear. Another tore through his sleeve. He glanced back one last time. Dinah was being tied to a horse, her eyes wild with fear as she searched for him. Cato! She screamed. Don't leave me! The words tore at his heart, but there was nothing he could do. Not now, not against so many. Another bullet struck the tree beside him. With a last agonized look at Dinah, he plunged into the forest. He ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, the wound in his side leaving a trail of blood behind him. Only when the sounds of pursuit faded did he slow, his legs finally giving out beneath him. Cato collapsed to his knees in a small clearing, gasping for breath. The axe, still clutched in his hand, was sticky with drying blood. His side throbbed with each heartbeat, sending fresh waves of pain through his body. "Dinah," he whispered, her name a prayer and a curse. Hot tears cut tracks through the blood and dirt on his face. He had failed her. After everything, after killing the master, after days of desperate flight, he had lost her again. The image of her being dragged away burned in his mind, her screams echoing in his ears. Cato pressed his forehead to the cool earth, his body racked with silent sobs. The weight of his failure threatened to crush him completely. But beneath the despair, something else stirred. A cold, hard fury that steadied his breathing and dried his tears. He raised his head, fingers tightening around the axe handle. "This is not the end," he vowed, his voice rough with pain and determination. "I will find you, Dinah. I will find you and free you, no matter what it costs." He looked up at the morning sky through the trees, making his promise to whatever powers might be listening. This is not the end. Night cloaked the forest in deep shadows. The hunting party had made camp in a small clearing, their fire casting flickering light on tired faces. 4 men remained of the original 6, plus the master's son. They passed a bottle between them, voices low as they discussed the day's failure. Cato watched from the darkness, as still as the trees around him. His side burned where the bullet had grazed him, but he had stopped the bleeding with moss and cobweb. Pain was a distant thing now, buried beneath cold purpose. The hunters had Dinah tied to a tree at the edge of camp. Even from his hiding place, Cato could see the defiance in her posture. She hadn't broken. The sight strengthened his resolve. He studied the camp carefully. The men's horses were tethered nearby. Rifles leaned against logs. One man stood guard while the others prepared to sleep. The master's son sat apart, staring into the fire, jumping at every sound from the forest. Cato slipped away, moving deeper into the woods. His mind worked like it did when planning a difficult piece of carpentry, measuring, calculating, seeing the finished work before it existed. He found what he needed in a gully, a fallen tree, heavy but not too massive. With his axe, he carefully notched one end, working silently despite the pain in his side. When finished, he propped the log against another tree, creating a deadfall trap. A simple tripwire of vine completed it. Farther along the hunter's likely path, Cato dug a pit with his hands and the axe blade, making it deep enough to trap a man. He lined the bottom with sharpened stakes, disguising the top with a careful layer of branches and leaves. Through the night he worked, setting trap after trap in a wide circle around the camp. His carpenter's hands, accustomed to precise work, never faltered. Each trap was placed where a man would naturally step while searching the woods. Dawn was still hours away when Cato returned to watch the camp. The guard had changed. One of the burlier men now stood watch, fighting sleep as he paced. The others snored by the dying fire. The master's son tossed in restless sleep, mumbling fearful words. Cato picked up a stone and threw it far to the west of the camp. It landed with a distinct crack. The guard's head snapped up. "Who's there?" he called, lifting his rifle. Cato threw another stone, closer this time. The guard frowned, moving toward the sound. "Wake up!" he hissed to the others. "I heard something." 2 men stirred, grumbling as they reached for their weapons. The master's son sat up, eyes wide with fear. "Is it him?" he asked, voice cracking. "Shut up!" one of the men growled. "Probably just a deer." Cato threw a third stone, deliberately closer. The guard squared his shoulders. "I'm going to check," he announced. You two circle around that way." They moved exactly as Cato had planned. The guard headed straight for the deadfall trap, while the other two moved toward the pit. The master's son and the remaining hunter stayed with Dinah, rifles ready. Cato circled silently through the trees. The night seemed to hold its breath. The crack of branches breaking shattered the silence, followed by a scream cut brutally short. The deadfall had claimed its victim. "Thomas?" one of the men called. "Thomas, you all right?" Panic spread through the camp. The two hunters who had headed toward the pit stopped, uncertain. "Go check on him," the remaining man at camp ordered. They hesitated, then continued forward. Cato watched as one man stepped directly onto the disguised pit. The forest floor gave way beneath him. His scream echoed through the trees, ending in a wet gurgle as the stakes found their mark. His companion backpedaled in terror, firing blindly into the darkness. Cato was already moving, circling behind him. The hunter backed into another of Cato's traps, a simple snare that caught his ankle and yanked him upward. His rifle fell as he dangled helplessly from a tree branch, shouting curses. In the camp, chaos erupted. The master's son was on his feet, pointing his rifle in every direction. The last hunter stood protectively in front of him. "He's out there," the master's son whispered. "He's hunting us." Dinah watched from her tree, hope dawning on her face. Cato moved like a shadow toward the suspended hunter. The man's eyes widened when he saw Cato approach, axe in hand. "Please," the hunter begged. "We were just doing our job." "So am I," Cato replied, and swung the axe. Back at the camp, the hanging man's scream sent the last hunter bolting into the woods, directly toward another of Cato's traps. A sickening thud, followed by silence, told of his fate. Only the master's son remained, trembling as he clutched his rifle. Dinah watched him with cold satisfaction in her eyes. "You can't hide!" the boy shouted, voice breaking. "My father built this plantation. These lands are ours." "Your father is dead," Cato said, stepping into the firelight, "and these lands belong to no man." The boy whirled, firing wildly. The shot went wide. Before he could chamber another round, Cato closed the distance between them. With one powerful sweep of his arm, he knocked the rifle away and grabbed the boy by his throat. "You should kill me," the master's son choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Like you killed my father." Cato studied the boy's face, so much like his father's, yet lacking the hardness years of cruelty had carved there. He was young, perhaps 16, raised to believe the world was his birthright. "I won't kill you," Cato said at last. "You're going to carry a message." He dragged the boy to the horses and forced him onto one. The master's son stared down at him, confusion mixing with fear. "Tell them what happened here," Cato said. "Tell them the slaves they hunt are not powerless. Tell them we will fight for our freedom." He slapped the horse's flank. The animal bolted, carrying the terrified boy through the trees. Cato watched until they disappeared from sight, the thunder of hooves fading into the night. Then he turned back toward the camp where Dinah was tied. Her eyes shone with tears of relief. With quick strokes of his axe, Cato cut her bonds. She fell into his arms, clinging to him as if he might disappear. "I knew you would come," she whispered against his chest. Cato held her tight, determination burning in his eyes as he looked beyond the camp to the north. Freedom waited somewhere beyond these woods, and nothing would stop them now. Before dawn touched the edge of the sky, Cato moved through the camp with grim purpose. The fire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to see by. One hunter remained, slumped against a tree trunk, fighting sleep as he guarded Dinah. His eyes drooped, then snapped open at a sound. Too late. Cato emerged from the shadows like a spirit, axe gripped tight in his calloused hands. The hunter fumbled for his rifle, but exhaustion made him slow. Cato struck without hesitation, the blade catching the firelight as it arced through the air. The man crumpled without a sound. Dinah watched, her face unreadable in the dim light. She had not turned away. Cato crossed to her with quick steps, dropping to one knee. The ropes binding her to the tree were thick and rough, but his axe made short work of them. As the last fibers snapped, Dinah fell forward into his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. "Cato," she whispered against his shirt, his name a prayer on her lips. "Cato." He held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair despite the dirt and sweat. His hands trembled now that the killing was done. For a moment, they stayed locked together, two broken pieces finding their match in a world determined to keep them apart. "We need to move," he finally said, helping her to her feet. "North, always north." Dinah nodded, wiping tears from her face with steady hands. "I can walk." They gathered what they could from the camp: a water skin, a knife, a small sack of cornmeal. Cato hesitated over the hunters' rifles, then left them. The axe was burden enough. They slipped away as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky. Behind them, birds began to gather around the silent camp. The day passed in careful movement through dense forest. They avoided roads and open ground, staying to the shadows where they could. Dinah moved with surprising strength despite her ordeal, matching Cato step for step. They spoke little, saving their breath for the journey, but their hands found each other often, fingers intertwining like roots seeking soil. As dusk approached, hunger gnawed at their bellies. They had stretched the cornmeal as far as it would go, eating tiny handfuls mixed with water. Cato spotted smoke rising from a small farm in the distance. After careful observation, he decided to risk approaching. "Wait here," he told Dinah, tucking her into a hollow beneath fallen trees. "Be careful," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Come back to me." The farmhouse was modest, but well kept, with a small barn and chicken coop. Cato crept close enough to see a man in plain clothes reading by lamplight through the window. Something about the simplicity of his dress gave Cato hope. He approached the back door and knocked softly. The door opened to reveal a bearded man with kind eyes. His gaze traveled from Cato's face to the axe in his hand, but he showed no fear. "Friend," the man said quietly, "thee looks in need of shelter." "I have a wife," Cato replied, his voice rough from disuse. "We seek the north." The man nodded. "I am Thomas. My family are friends, Quakers. We do not believe any man should own another," Thomas called softly to Dinah, who emerged hesitantly from the trees. Inside the small house, his wife Sarah laid out bread, cheese, and milk. They ate slowly, savoring each bite. The Quaker children watched with wide eyes but asked no questions. "The next safe house is 2 days' journey," Thomas explained, spreading a rough map on the table. "Follow this creek until it meets the river. Cross at the shallow ford here, then look for a barn with a blue door." They left before midnight, with fresh supplies and directions carefully memorized. Sarah embraced Dinah before they departed. "God keep thee safe," she whispered. The days blurred together after that. They crossed fields under moonlight, waded through cold streams, and hid in abandoned barns when rain lashed the countryside. Each night, they followed the North Star like a promise hanging in the darkness. They met others like Thomas and Sarah, a preacher who hid them in his church cellar, an elderly woman who bandaged Cato's infected bullet wound, a free black family who gave them sturdy shoes for the journey ahead. Between these islands of kindness stretched dangerous waters. Twice they narrowly avoided patrols with dogs. Once they spent a full day submerged to their necks in a swamp as riders passed nearby. Hunger became a constant companion, exhaustion a faithful shadow. Through it all, Dinah never complained. Her strength flowed into Cato when his own faltered. At night, they held each other close, sharing warmth and whispered hopes of the life they might build. On the 10th day, they reached a wide, rushing river. An old man with weathered hands ferried them across in a small boat, accepting no payment but a promise. "Live free, he told them as they stepped onto the northern shore. "That's all the payment I need." Standing on the riverbank, Cato felt something shift inside him. This was free soil beneath his feet. No master's law reached here. He looked down at the axe in his hand. The blade was dark with dried blood, the handle smooth from his grip. It had carved their path to freedom, one terrible blow at a time. Now it felt suddenly heavy, a weight he no longer needed to carry. Cato raised the axe high, then hurled it far out into the rushing water. It spun once, catching the light of the setting sun, before disappearing beneath the current. The river accepted it, without judgment, carrying away the blood and violence of their past. Dinah took his empty hand in hers. Her face, thin and tired, glowed with quiet joy as she looked up at the emerging stars. "We are nobodies but our own now," she whispered. Cato squeezed her hand. The path ahead was uncertain. They had no home, no money, no protection but each other. Freedom was a wilderness as dangerous as it was beautiful. But they would face it together, scarred but unbroken. Hand in hand, they walked away from the river into the gathering darkness. Behind them, the water continued its journey, bearing away the last physical reminder of all they had endured to reach this moment. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.